The city itself will be our playground to use as we please, rewarding ourselves and punishing our enemies.
We've been looking for you, Miss O'Neill.
There is a new enemy, freaks of nature. Together, we will punish these creatures.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bratt's Spin Reviews. I'm host and filmmaker Jared Bratt. You can find a link to my psychodrama feature film streamer that's in the description below, available to watch on Tubi. Joining me for another special episode, host and filmmaker, interviewer and reviewer, host of the Hey You Made Your Movie show, Carl Diamond.
Dudes and dudettes, butt kicking is back in town. Yeah, it's good to be back, Jared. Really excited to be talking about this film today.
Yeah, me too. And joining us, as always, host and filmmaker, interviewer, reviewer, Robert Mitchell.
Cowabunga, dudes.
Cowabunga, where's the pizza?
So I just wanted to mention that anybody listening to this in the Toronto area, that my short film, The Bobby Diamond Story, will be receiving its North American premiere at the Toronto Smartphone Film Festival, June 16th, 7 p.m. at Innis Town Hall Theatre at 2 Sussex Street in downtown Toronto. The Bobby Diamond Story is a film about underground poker player Bobby Diamonds, who steps into the spotlight in this hallucinatory, hilarious, and heartfelt documentary. It would be awesome to see as many people there, and we get to hang out and talk about films in person.
That sounds so cool.
That's sick, man. And I like the fact that you say it's hallucinatory.
Yeah.
That grabs me.
Yeah, that grabbed me as well.
On this episode, we are talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, released in 1990, directed by Steve Barron. So, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, guys.
Yeah, buddy.
I guess the first question would be, what is your guys' experience or history with the TMNT property?
Like all of it?
Well, I mean, like, how did you come into this movie? Because for me, I was obsessed with the cartoon. I watched that religiously. From the cartoon, I was reading the comics, but it wasn't until years later that I realized the OG comic incarnation of TMNT was actually gritty and dark, like most of the direction of this first movie. You know, I never stopped liking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't actively follow all the incarnations of that property now, but I mean, I do actively, like, this movie I think is a classic and I do watch it once a year. The movie from 1990 has never left me.
I was born in 88, so I completely missed the TV run of it, but I watched the reruns on Channel 11 in Northbrook, Illinois, when I was a kid sitting on the floor in front of a TV. The overall vibe of the show and the imagery really stuck with me and hit me in the best of ways. I think I found out about the movie the movie came out in 90, so maybe 92, because my neighbor across the street, who was significantly older than me, he had a copy of it on VHS. So I'd go over there, I'd watch the tape, didn't understand the movie other than the imagery, was bored by parts of it, but there's parts of it that were just so thrilling and entertaining that, you put up with the boring parts when you're 5 or 4. That's how I came to the movie. I've seen all 3 of the movies, and then I saw the terrible CGI ones that came out some time ago with Megan Fox.
Well, there was an animated CG film, I believe, in 2007 that was just called TMNT. I saw that when it came to DVD.
Yeah, that totally forgot about that one. I remember that one being pretty good.
It was fine. Like, it wasn't anything crazy, but it wasn't bad. But yeah, the Michael Bay produced CG/live action ones, I just can't stand. And that's why this one holds up so great.
I hadn't seen it since I was 4, and now watching it as a 35-year-old man, I'm shocked at A, how well it holds up, and B, how much my mind confused 1 and 2. Like, 1 and 2 in my mind were fused together as one movie. Because I kept waiting for that opening scene that was in 2. The guys breaking into the mall.
The first film is the legitimate classic in my books. But long story short, the interesting thing about Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze, they made sure that movie was released exactly 1 year later from this movie. Because this 1990 film made $202 million on a $13.5 million budget.
Mm-hmm.
And this was considered the highest grossing independent movie of 1990 and the highest grossing movie of that year.
It was the highest grossing independent, but I think of all the big movies that year, that was the 9th one of 1990. But let's take a moment to think about independent film, $13 million budget. It just seems like maybe today a $13 million budget for an independent film would be like considered indie, but like this is 1990. It seems like a lot of money for an independent film.
It's just because of where it was coming from.
As far as
I was going to allude to it later, but Golden Harvest Studios fronted the money, the studios behind like Police Story and Enter the Dragon. And then every studio in Hollywood had rejected the script based on the fact that Howard the Duck had bombed like severely, and nobody wanted to touch anything remotely resembling that film of like comic books and people in suits. So it's an involved story where the writer of the screenplay took it to a friend of his who was working for Golden Harvest, the Hong Kong film studio, and they agreed to put up $3 million. They didn't have enough money 10 days prior to shooting the film, and they brought in New Line, who put up a bit more money, and then Raymond Chow put in another $6 million. I think the independent stature of the film is because it wasn't actually financed through the traditional Hollywood studio system.
Ah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, looking back with the way we see TMNT today, that property, to think that, oh yeah, you know, no one has any faith in this property, and so you have to get New Line, who is known for making successful low-budget movies, like the Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and then Hong Kong guys who are known for, maybe you can provide different insight, but I would imagine that the Hong Kong guys weren't maybe seen as legitimate yet.
No, not at all, because Jackie Chan, around 91 is when Rumble in the Bronx comes out, and it's finally his third attempt at breaking it. So he had been trying for the decade prior in the 80s with a couple of attempts to break into the American market, and it didn't happen. Like in my friend circle growing up watching movies, when you saw the iconic 4 squares come together and change color of the Golden Harvest symbol, it was amazing. The Jackie Chan films especially, and then, you know, you go back and, as I said, Enter the Dragon. So having the Golden Harvest name be the first thing come up in these main credit sequence when we were kids, you're like, holy shit, this is gonna rock.
So then when did you see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
I had to have seen it when it came out in the theater. That was my entry point. I was aware of the comics and, you know, the cartoon, but I wasn't really into it. And then we had gone to the theater and saw the film. So it was definitely, this film was my entry point into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe. It was years later I would go and seek out the source material, the Eastman and Laird comics.
The other thing I wanted to say about that sequel, Secret of the Ooze, is just that it's also, you know, it's a lot sillier. It's a lot more dumbed down as a response to heavy backlash that this first movie got from authority figures. Damn those adults. Everything that makes this movie great is the dark tone. It's so crazy to me, but like, just in terms of specifically how New York City looks at night in this movie, I find looks the same way in another movie that takes place in New York, Basketball Diaries. The two movies have similar looks and feel and grain to like this gritty New York setting, and that blows my mind that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has that in common with Basketball Diaries.
In my own film imagination, there's like subgenres and genres and genres, and I have this one, New York City movies at night, and it's like After Hours, Chud, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is in that rightful like subgenre that I have. There's something about 80s and 90s New York movies, especially at night, and the grittiness of the city and the grittiness of the film stock. This is a film that I personally go back to. It's one of those films that's like a Sunday afternoon film for me, like Bloodsport or, you know, Jewel of the Nile. It's one of those films that were on TV over the years, and you just, if it's on, and you'll just stop, and it doesn't matter where you're at in the film, you're just going to start watching.
At the heart of it, all the characters work so well. There's so many great emotional moments about father-son dynamics and brotherhood. These turtles are living, breathing characters that have very relatable personalities. Every character is treated with respect. Beyond all of that, because I think all that stuff is really, you know, why any movie works as well as it does. But one of the editors listed on this movie is Sally Menke, you know, Tarantino's editor from Reservoir Dogs all the way to Inglourious Basterds. I really think the editing of this movie is super tight. There's that part after the turtles have bonded with April and she's met Splinter and all of them, and she's taking them back to her place, and they come out of the sewer and she's like, what do you guys like on your pizza? 'Cause she mentions she has frozen pizza at home, and then they're like, oh, just the usual flies, bugs, and then she's got a look of bewilderment, or she's like, are you serious? And then you hear laughter, but it's from the next scene of them doing impressions and everybody's having a good time. There's a lot of like interesting seamless cuts that just keep the pace going. Raphael getting his ass kicked on the roof of April's apartment while he's fighting with the Foot Clan. They go downstairs to her, her father's old
antique shop.
Right, yeah. And then she goes to click the light switch, and then we cut right to Raphael falling on the ground.
Yeah, no, good juxtaposition.
And that movie is full of those type of edits, and I'd like to believe Sally Menke was instrumental.
Ready?
I totally 100% agree with you that she's behind that, because an interesting factoid, speaking of the editing process of this movie, is the director Steve Barron was fired as the film was heading into editing by the producers because they thought his vision for the film as they were making it was too dark. An interesting fact of that is when they shot the film, Master Tatsu, he beats up a kid, right, in the Foot Clan. When they shot the movie in production, the kid was beaten to death. In the edit, they add breathing sounds and a voice says, he'll be all right.
I thought that might be the case when I was watching it. I'm like, oh man, that guy looks dead.
Yeah, the darkness of this film is like, Casey Jones, right? When Shredder gets dumped into the garbage truck, he hits the switch of the garbage truck. The tone of this movie's, I think it's great. Obviously, as a kid, I loved it. And looking back at it all these years later, I think the tone of the film is really balanced between the cartoons. That's where they brought in all the different bandana colors because the comics were in black and white, and their love of pizza was from the cartoons. The tone, I think, straddles the juxtaposition between the color of the cartoon and the source material, the much grittier, darker comics that were steeped in blood.
The other editing example, the Turtles are fighting the Foot Clan at the end, and then it cuts to Casey Jones fighting Master Tatsu. There's a great visceralness that it just cuts into, and there's some great editing between those two fight sequences, the contrast of them, because, the Turtles one with the Foot Clan is fun and adventurous, and then the one with Casey and Master Tatsu is kind of brutal.
A little Primatine might just help to clear that up there.
It's interesting because Casey's supposed to be this like heroic kind of character, and for most of the Tatsu one, he's like talking tough, but he's not really defending himself. He's getting his ass kicked, which is, I think kind of different from a lot of the other media of the time, like the tough guy being able to defend himself, whether it's like a Stallone or any action hero, would be able to like fight off this guy. Whereas Casey Jones just didn't even seem to be doing anything besides just getting knocked around until he fought back.
With the golf club.
Yeah, which I don't know if it's a tactic or if that was just bad directing. I don't know what it was, but I found it really interesting. It's almost like Tatsu was Seagal. Any Seagal movie where Seagal just kicks ass and like no one can put up a fight.
As a kid, Tatsu I found intimidating.
Oh, definitely.
When he partakes in the training of the Foot Clan, he's sparring with what appears to be one of the more talented fighters. And then at the end, the fighter bows, and then Tatsu kicks him in the face. He's like, never lower your eyes to an enemy. It's like, damn, that makes sense.
Never lower your eyes to an enemy.
My neighbors and I were recreating that scene where it's like, training to be a ninja and whatnot. One of my neighbors bowed to my other neighbor and he kicked him in the face as he bowed and just repeated that line.
Which goes all the way back to 73. And of course, another Golden Harvest movie, Enter the Dragon, where Bruce Lee is training the kid. They bow and the kid bows all the way down and he slaps him on the head. Bruce Lee does, and then points a finger out and he's like, don't concentrate on the finger or you'll miss all that heavenly glory.
I really think that, you could throw around that expression, they don't make him like they used to, but I really think this movie is the epitome of that.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're never going to see the Turtles ever be made in a feature film in the way they were in these 90s films.
Not at all. Like Jim Henson's not around anymore, and, they're not going to go through the whole effort, which I would imagine was a big pain in the butt, doing all that practical costume work and puppetry.
That's one thing I wanted to touch upon. Jared was talking about the characters of this film, and you watch it, right? And then these turtles, they jump out at you. And I think it's remarkable that through all of this latex and animatronics work, they are viable characters, and they have personalities, and they do shine through the costumes.
You know what scene kind of doesn't give you a breather, but I think it's just brilliant? It's one of the two scenes that I think brings a tear to my eye. When Raphael comes back after he's fought Casey and he's gone to see critters. Where do they come up with this stuff? Splinter gives him that whole speech, and the camera is just really like Gaspar Noé style. The camera's just going right up in their faces. The lighting is like a candle, and it's just pretty powerful.
The cinematography of that film, I just like when you mentioned the look of it, when Shredder is presented in the film, it's got that great overhead shot, and then the shadow is this elongated shadow as he moves forward, and then the camera swoops down and pans around him to reveal this amazing costume.
It's so badass.
It's one of the great character reveals, I think, now that I'm thinking on it.
Oh, I think it's up there with Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
He has the line, "I'm your father," so it did make me think of that. Before the official intro of Shredder with that great sequence, you do get that scene. It's just from the back of him, and he's watching April interview the police chief, and he throws the knife at the TV, and he's like, "Find her, silence her." That's also a great semi-quasi introduction to Shredder. So good. And Shredder is menacing.
I'm not denying anything. Again, you're putting words into my mouth.
I'm sorry, Jared. It often seems that somebody ought to.
Silence her.
Steve Barron said that when he was pitching how he was going to do this movie, he referenced Ghostbusters and the '89 Batman, and he said he wanted to bring those two tones together.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense because it's such a specific voice in this movie and direction. You can just see what they're going for. Like, this movie was very innovative and game-changing. I remember waking up and hearing my parents, they had family friends over, and I knew they were watching a movie, which already kind of like pissed me off as a kid because I wanted to be up watching a movie. And I go downstairs and they're watching fucking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Adults were loving this movie.
Yeah, it's a film that definitely has cross appeal.
I can imagine seeing a bunch of turtles and, guys in suits fighting and ninjas. Everyone loves that.
Yeah, like when I was a kid, ninjas were like the shit. I mean, we had Ninjutsu magazine with Kung Fu magazine. I had this little paperback on the art of invisibility. I took a home ec class where you had to like cook and sew things. The second thing I had to make for my own personal project was a ninja mask, which then showed up in all of these films where my friends and I beat the shit out of each other on a VHS camera.
God, those were the days.
For a film that has a lot of cinematography that's really dark and works, like the big character close-ups and that and stuff like that. But the fight scenes, the camera's like placed somewhere and you can see all the moves and everything. And it's also a huge ode to the Jim Henson Creature Shop that they made these costumes in a way that people could legit fight in them.
Yeah, that's always been my gripe with these newer versions of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is they always take a jab at these original movies and they're like, yeah, well now you can really see them fight and see them do ninja stuff. Like you said, Rob, I think the choreography works and it's cool and it's good practical action.
I mean, the stuff that I'm seeing in this movie, the fight sequences and that are just, they're fun, Shout out to Pat Johnson, the fight choreographer, who is no stranger to video game movies because he also did stunts on Mortal Kombat and also on the Karate Kid 1 and 3. So he knew his way around a fight scene.
Yeah, it's like that guy didn't know what he was doing with these fight scenes. Of course he did. The action's good in this movie.
Let's say for the sake of argument that it's not, that it was kind of cheap or cheesy, or if it was kind of like, stiff. I'd take that every day of the week versus the dumbass shit with like jumping off the buildings and flipping and jumping around and completely generated inside a computer nonsense. Every day of the week, I take what was actually shot on camera versus what was put in post.
There's something magical about like Godzilla in 1954 and a dude running around a miniature set of buildings and destroying them, or like Toxic Avenger or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. All of us of a certain era when we grew up watching films and practical effects and practical costuming, because it brings in that human element.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's much more effective at being escapism than the stuff that involves CGI. It almost feels like this is the Golden Harvest Muppet movie.
Well, like April O'Neil has a freak out, of course. She wakes up on their couch in the sewer. And, well, first off, you'd freak out you're in a sewer. But she freaks out when she sees the turtles. But then, Not all that much time has passed. She's like, okay, whatever. Hey, guys, I got a frozen pizza, whatever. You know what I mean? So she reacts like big and then just accepts that, okay, well, they exist and they're part of the New York universe.
Yeah, it's like Kermit the Frog talking to a guy.
Film is illusion and it's magic and it's all that, obviously. However, there has to be some sort of human thing in these films.
You're saying the human element, and it was making me think of, this is probably one of the scenes I think about a lot, but when Donatello goes to sit by Michelangelo, who's waiting for the pizza to come, and he's like, do you ever think about what Splinter said, about not having him? And it's just this brief moment where Michelangelo, you can tell he's thinking about the question, but he doesn't want to touch on that heavy shit. So he just kind of like brushes it off and he switches the subject.
That's a great scene. It's such a great little subtle scene.
Because it's a perfect rendition of how we interact with each other. But it's just so brilliant that this movie does that between, actors in turtle costumes.
Hey, Mikey, did you ever think about what Splinter said tonight? I mean, about what it would be like. Not having him.
Time's up. $3 off.
And that scene was included because Domino's paid money to be in that movie. And they're like, oh yeah, there's pizza. They love pizza. Let's have a scene that we could use in a Domino's commercial later.
Yeah, the Domino's delivery guy is the actor who plays Michelangelo.
Oh, really?
And then the actor in the taxi cab who's been in a shitload of movies when Raphael is running after Casey Jones and he jumps over the hood of the car. And the guy in the backseat's like, what the heck was that? That's the actor playing the voice of Raphael.
That's awesome.
So they all have cameos throughout the movie. It's funny, though, that it's Domino's Pizza that's advertised in the movie, but I don't know, for me on my VHS, there's this commercial for Pizza Hut.
Yeah!
Yeah, with the kid and the baseball and all that.
Uh-huh.
Dude, it's so just ingrained into my head.
So I wanted to mention there is a Super Mario Brothers connection to this movie. Super Mario Brothers 93 and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were both shot at Screen Gym Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Really?
Yeah, and there was another film, an ill-fated film in 94 that was shot in that same studio in North Carolina, The Crow. And if you look at some of the street scenes that aren't obviously New York exteriors, but if you look at some of the set stuff, those same buildings are the ones that are in The Crow. There's one especially when they come back from the farmhouse and it's pouring rain and they're back in New York City, and I'm doing air quotes that nobody can see, but when they're back in New York City and it's pouring rain and you see like signs for like bars and stuff like that, you look at that set, which will come back into play. You look at those buildings, they're the exact same ones of The Crow when, T-Bird and that are driving the cars and whatnot, or he goes to the pawn shop.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I can see it as you're saying it. I'm like, oh my God.
One thing I really like about this movie is the plot itself is just pretty simple. It's a guy running a crime syndicate, sending kids out to, rob people and acquire merchandise to resell on the black market. I thought if there was ever a movie that was conceived of in 1990-ish era that could have been highly just crazy convoluted, it could have been a film like this. I just like how it's a simple plot.
Just to add to what you said about the simplicity, that prologue of the movie where you hear April O'Neil talking about how much crime is in the city and how nothing's happening, the police aren't doing anything. The visual storytelling there is so effective. You have the kid pickpocketing the guy and then the Foot Clan hand coming in and taking the wallet, and it's just, you get this idea that immediately children are robbing people and giving their stealings to the Foot Clan. There you go. You know the problem. Now how are they going to solve that problem? It's so simple.
That great scene with the woman on the balcony watching TV with the I Love New York sticker on it. She turns away and the TV's gone.
Oh yeah, that's great.
It feels like a documentary, I think, at that point, because there's something so natural about her reaction. That's a great opening.
Get you up to speed immediately.
You're into that world. And then the reporter who's talking about all these problems, she's not free from the crime. She's getting mugged. And as soon as she's mugged, the lights go out and she's saved by Ninja Turtles. It's wonderful.
I just love that shot of when Raphael's carrying April back to the lair after she's been knocked out by the Foot Clan in the subway. And it's just all dark and grimy and they're in the sewer, and then he stops and you get that close-up of his face, but he's still kind of in silhouette. He just looks back to see if he's being followed, doesn't see anything, and then he keeps going. Just that beat.
funny because I was thinking if you're like a 15-year-old kid, which around the time I would have watched this film, like the Foot Clan hangout is like the ultimate place for you. And there's no rules other than you're robbing for this guy, but when you're there hanging out, you can do whatever the fuck you want.
How can school and how do the Ninja Turtles compete against probably the coolest cyberpunk dystopian looking arcade headquarters that I've ever seen in film? You got unlimited soda, unlimited video games, you got people dancing, a skateboard ramp that goes through most of the building. You got Sam Rockwell offering you menthol cigarettes or regular cigarettes. You can smoke all the cigarettes you want. It's like Pleasure Island from Pinocchio.
I wanted to hang out in that hangout as a kid, and I still want to hang out in that hangout.
Even more as an adult, right?
Honestly, I don't think anything has really changed.
Yeah.
It was badass then, it's badass now.
Yeah, the hangout was used for the Crow as well as Super Mario Brothers, and it was like an abandoned cement factory called the Ideal Cement Factory outside of Wilmington, North Carolina. This location was also used as a set for a Dino Hatton in Super Mario Brothers and Top Dollars nightclub in the Crow.
That's awesome.
Also, the funny thing is for me is, like I said, as a kid, I didn't know about the OG comics until much later. So really, I was going off the cartoons. But I remember as a kid, I was like, oh, they changed the origin of Splinter. In the movie, Splinter's a rat learning the art of ninja from his cage. And I didn't realize till years later that that's actually the true origin of Splinter.
Oh, really? He was never a human? That's cool.
I always thought they're switching things up for this more adult movie, but no, they're just staying true to the comics.
It's funny because this property's everywhere. It's one of the most popular selling toys, but at this time in 1990, here's this film. And I love the origin story. It's clear and concise. I just like how in this origin movie, we've seen origin superhero movies that are 2 hours and 45 minutes long now. But here you go. You have an origin story told in a flashback in a couple of minutes.
The puppetry in the flashback scenes where Splinter's like, I copied my master's ninjutsu, and it's just like, oh yeah, it's just a rat doing that. So yeah, that's cool. And you think about it, oh, rats don't do that at all. Watching this movie now, it made me nostalgic for a time when movies were a special event. When you'd have a TV or a comic IP and it was given the title The Movie, like Ninja Turtles, The Movie. It's the same characters that you love, but now they're getting that shiny polish. They're all dressed up in their fancy suits and they're going to do a fantastic show for you. I don't think we have that anymore.
You're so right about that. Just having The Movie, the meaning of what that meant. You were getting something that was going to be more quality. I'd like to think that I can tell the difference between a movie that holds up because it's legitimately good versus a movie that is still memorable, but that's just more of nostalgia. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it holds up because it's actually a well-made film. Overall, I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990 is magical. It's a good example of how you make something that's, you could say, for a family or for kids, but still treat it with a very adult sensibility and not lose either tone in the process.
Looking back on it from the films of my childhood, this is one of the high watermark films for me. Obviously, it's a film that has dark moments in it, but it's a film that definitely holds up. The work that Jim Henson and his Creature Company did is absolutely phenomenal. Those costumes still hold up. You could put them in a movie right now with our modern day ways of making movies, and I think they would still look wonderful. I think it's just one of the great childhood films of my childhood, and a film that you could show a child today and they would totally just be like, yeah, this rocks.
Yeah, if you're Gen Z and you've never heard of this movie, or you're excited about the new TMNT but haven't done your homework, go do your homework and watch the original.
Yeah! I love being a turtle!
And I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but the really dramatic shot where Donatello is sitting. Is it Donatello or Leonardo? I think it's Leonardo. Where Leonardo is sitting watching over Raphael.
Leonardo,
and it's all he's all dramatic and whatnot, and then it cuts to Raphael just like looks like he's just been tossed into the bathtub. If you notice, it doesn't look like he's not like reverently positioned, and he's not like, it's like the shot where the kids were like, imagine in a different movie, the shot where the guy's in the hospital bed, hooks up with the breathing tubes, and he's like still, but he's reverent, and he looks at peace.
They just dumped him there.
He just looks looks like the crew just took the suit and just laid it in there haphazardly. And it's just a hard cut that I was dying for like 5 minutes, crying, laughing. Yeah, it's like it's amazing how it goes back and forth tonally between the Turtles and the Foot stuff, like the Foot Clan, Foot stuff,
Tarantino,
the Foot Clan. Yeah. Oh man, this is all Tarantino. It's a Foot Clan, Sally Menke. Oh man, I have to hire my editor.
This does mean at some point we have to talk about The Crow, because it's a trifecta of these films.
That was going to happen no matter what, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Unavoidable talking about The Crow on our 90s film podcast.